Danielle and Christy, you guys have been married for 19 years. And of those 19 years, you've been doing ministry together since you were married, before you were married. Is that right?
Yes.
So how did you guys meet?
We met at Southwestern at the time, College of Christian Ministries, SCCM, and became best friends pretty quickly. And then, it was, everybody knew we were going to get married before we knew we were going to get married. It's one of those kind of things.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Awesome. So did you know, becoming best friends and going into dating and then pursuing marriage, did you know at that time that you were going to do ministry together, or was that more of a gradual progression?
I think whenever we made the decision to get married, I think that we knew, then or maybe leading up to that that was going to be our ministry, just because that's what we had known of each other for a lot of our time at college. But I don't know that it was the way, I don't know that we planned it out quite the way that it ended up like anything else.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, so after 19 years of not only being married to each other and having multiple children and being in the same church for most of this time, and doing ministry together, you have probably had no conflicts, no issues. It's been smooth sailing. You agree on everything. So I bet this has been really easy for you guys.
It is, yeah.
It's been a walk in the park, Taylor. A walk in the park.
So we're done here, right?
Yeah, that was it. Thank you guys for joining us for ELMS. This has been ministry in, through, and from conflict, marriage, the Barlows. Nailed it. Batting 1,000 on everything.
Not.
No, it's been challenging. In fact, I think probably one of the biggest, I guess, conflicts, and it's not necessarily a major thing, but it's something that we probably talk about more than anything, is just our personality differences and how we deal with in ministry, how we deal with issues and people and things like that. And she feels like that it should be, we should handle it one way, and I feel like we should handle it a different way. And it's really just personality. And so talking through that and working through that, I think has probably been the biggest conflict, if you will. But the longer we do it and the older we get, the more that we learn each other, and it's easier to work through those things.
So other than just personality, have you experienced any other types of conflicts between ministry and your marriage? And then how do you deal with those conflicts?
Yeah, I think that I've heard your father say this several times. The best thing about ministry is people, and the most difficult thing about ministry is the people.
Yep.
And so I think that if there's been conflict, a lot of times it's just been dealing with people to, again, it is a personality thing, but also just not just our personalities. We're dealing with all kinds of personalities and different kinds of needs and things like that. And so sometimes the conflict has come in just I guess it's more of a wrestle than a conflict. That what is right? How do we do this the way that we're supposed to? And is there a way that we're supposed to? It's kind of a wrestle, I would say, more than a conflict. I don't, and that may sound very positive. There are some negatives to ministry, but I think we just made a decision very early in our relationship that we were going to work things out no matter what. And so it's more of a wrestle I think, for me.
Well, I think another conflict is time management, if you will,
Mm.
of managing time between our relationship and our family and ministry relationships and ministry things. And so that's always a challenge, I think, in any relationship, but I think for ministry, because there's not it's not a go to work at 8 and come home at 5 and everything stays at the office, and
Right.
there's always something going on, and so it's really easy to let those two things collide and cause conflict.
Well, I really appreciate your guys' example of a married couple doing ministry together well. I think there was a time where the idea of a couple doing ministry together was this kind of craze and this big exciting thing. And we've seen plenty of examples of married couples doing ministry together. And then we find out they did not really do it together, that there were nefarious things going on behind the scenes, generally televangelists or Christian celebrities. And even in today's world, we see how that's really hard to do in our American idolizing culture of people who do things very well. So how has ministry positively or negatively impacted your marriage?
I think there's ways, but for both. The positive is that we have a pretty open communication. We talk about everything. There's not not necessarily secret, but not a part of that that we hide from each other or any of those things. We've heard kind of horror stories of pastors who come home from board meetings and can't sleep because of the struggle and all of this, but he can't talk to his wife about those things, and because it's private and confidential and all of that. And so it allows us doing this together, allows us to talk about everything. There's no hidden things. I think if there was negatives, I think the negative is just the balance. Again, it's just balancing those things, and it's not a negative that is going to make or break our marriage or make or break our ministry. It's a balance that we just have to come together and say, okay, how do we fix this? How do we walk through this to make this better? And the other thing is that there's no fix all. There's no, okay, this went wrong this time, next time we'll handle it this way and it will be fine, because every situation is always different.
Yes.
And so it's just a constant learning and growing process. But again, we committed from early on, and we've walked through some of those things. And but I think probably the biggest thing is the positive of just communication, is that we can talk about anything and everything. It also allows us to spend probably more time together than some couples, because we do life together and we do ministry together. So
well, and I think that is part of the struggle too, or the negative thing. If you buy into other people's idea of what ministry is, and not stick to what God put on our hearts, the measure of success for your marriage and your ministry is not dependent on what man says. And so it's really challenging sometimes to not compare our marriage and our ministry to other people who seem to be doing well, because as you said earlier, what looks like something on the outside, we're not with those people 24/7. And so I think that's been kind of I don't know if it would be a negative impact, but just there's constant, you have constant input from other people of how you should be doing things. And it's been the balance to constantly come back to what did God speak to our hearts, and staying true to that, and staying the course and being steadfast has been challenging over the years. And but one of the things that has really, I think, ministered to my heart, and I may need a theologian to help me out with this one, but where Jesus says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? And that really has, every time I think about the world's idea of success and fortune, we can do that in the ministry too. We can do everything to gain the world, save souls, whatever it is, and we lose our own, and we lose our family. And that has been really powerful reminder to me that I don't want to gain what the world has to offer for our family or for myself, for our marriage. What God has to offer is better. And so just staying close to him has been challenging over the years. So, and that it due in part to ministry. So
I think it's really important to distinguish that there's a difference between doing things of God and doing things for God. It's that whole bit where Jesus, or where he says at the end, people are going to say, did we not cast out demons and spread your name? Did we not do this? And he says, well, depart from me, I don't know you. Because doing things of God means that there's an intimacy in knowing his heart and knowing his plan and his direction, whereas doing things for God is what we think he wants us to do, or what we think is the expectation. And those can be very, 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 very different. So by doing ministry together as a married couple, sharing, I don't want to say sharing a church, because that's not exactly the right terminology, but working together to disciple a community of believers at your local church, while also raising a family and being involved in all of their activities and school events and other things like that. How are some ways that you protect your marriage, your family, and your ministry, either from unnecessary conflict or during a time of conflict?
Well, I think seems like my answers are a lot the same, but one of the things that we're learning, and we've had a conversation similar to this recently, is, those lines of communication with each other, with our children, with our church people, and other people that we do ministry with. Everyone understanding the priority for us, and it's not always the same as everyone else. And that's okay. And so communicating with one another, and talked about that already, but also with our kids, and helping them to understand why we're doing this, or they have been with us to go visit people who've lost loved ones. They have been with us to walk into the funeral home. They've been with us to weddings and all kinds of different things, to go visit people. They're as much a part of our ministry as we are. They may not appreciate it as much as we do, but they're there. And so keeping those lines of communication open. One of the things that we had talked about recently about this is the open door kind of concept. And I think that's great as far as, church people that we're ministering to, coming and, to our house if they need help, or calling at any time and things like that. And I think that at a certain point, that's good. But at a certain point, for our family and for our kids and for our marriage, the door has to be shut. And we have to say that we have to protect that family time and make sure that we're having family time, that not just anyone else is always there or involved, that they know that they have priority. And it's not, for us, it's not from 6 to 8 p.m., we're not taking phone calls or any of that. But they, people around us understand that we're going to be at our kids' events. And if possible, we'll take a phone call. If not, we'll call when we're done, those type of things. And so, again, I think it goes back to those lines of communication and just being open about that, and not in a rude way of my kids come first, and so you're going to have to wait, but they understand that it's going to happen and we're going to do what we're supposed to do. And sometimes it's the same way with the kids, is that it's like, hey, I know this is what we had planned. I know that this is what we talked about, but this has come up, and some of those things do take priority, but it's prioritizing that time with them, and them understanding that they're important and that the ministry is not more important than them.
And I think it's one of the things. Conversation is my word for the year, and communication is, if we're willing to have the conversation, understanding can take place. And I think that's a form of protection too. We're very open with our children. They have questions. We want to give them godly, biblical answers, but also, just helping them to understand that there's nothing that they can't come to us with. I really feel like that's a form of protection for them, because, and a lot of times in the church, and I this is not my experience by and large, but we're taught not to come to the table with certain things. There's taboo issues and different things like that. So we bottle those things up inside. We keep them inside of our head, and the enemy that's where his playground is. And so to protect our children from the enemy, I think that God has just challenged us to keep those lines of communication open and have conversations that are difficult, but also help them to understand, we don't know all the answers, but we know the one who does. And so just, having times of prayer with our family has been a form of protection, I think. And yeah, just that, making sure that we're prioritizing things the way that God's order, not our order, which is it. I said it earlier, but it's very challenging to take your eyes off of what God thinks is important and put it on what man thinks is important whenever there's a measure of success. And that can be very damaging for your family and for your ministry. So,
well, definitely communication, I think, has been the overarching theme with this interview and this conversation. But I think it's because we have seen so many examples of people who do not communicate. And that leads to so many different types of issues for ministers who aren't clearly communicating with the church on what they expect their job description to be and how that it's going to affect their family, but then communicating with their family on what is going to be expected and required of them in their church and in their ministry. So I really appreciate that. Something my wife and I, Christy, have been really talking about is making sure that our children know they can talk to us about everything and anything that they want to, that good day, bad day, and anything in between. So I really appreciate that personally. So wrapping up this interview, this final question, you guys get the last word, and I appreciate your time, meeting like this and pouring wisdom, and hopefully that people who are listening to this interview, whether they are doing ministry by themselves or whether they are doing it with a spouse or are considering doing it with a spouse, I think you're dealing and discussing some really important timeless principles of just good ministry and a good, healthy ministry life, whether as a single minister who's married to somebody who works outside the church or a couple's doing ministry together. So in particular, for those young couples who are getting married or are married and are toying with the idea or really feel it impressed upon them to do a ministry together. Do you have any advice, direction, wisdom, life experience that could better prepare them for what they're getting themselves into?
Well, I think that, this is what we look for. We go and look for models of ministry, of relationships, of all kinds of different things, whatever we're looking for, so that we can say, oh, how did they do it? And I think the biggest thing is that there's not a right way or a wrong way to do it. We never sat down and had a conversation and said, what if we do ministry together and it looks different than everyone else? And how do we do that? We felt like God called us, together, obviously, and then said, here's what my plan is for the two of you. And when we came to Christian Life Church in Pauls Valley, we communicated with them that that's what we wanted, is that this isn't a me thing or a her thing. This is a we thing. And we've, walked through this whole process. And so I think our advice would be just do what you feel like God is calling you to do, and do it the way that he's created you to do it. And I think, again, I've said this a lot. The older I get, the less things I apologize for. And one of those is your personality. You are who you are. The thing about us doing ministry together is that we're not always together. But what that looks like is her taking a lady from the church to the doctor's office and spending that time with her and ministering to her. It's me doing, preaching a message or doing whatever, spending time with a guy from the church or whatever it is. And so we've recognized our strengths and our weaknesses, and we're okay to say, you know what, this has got you written all over it, go for it. But then there's other times that it's like, hey, we're going together, let's do this together. And so I think that would be, from me, my advice is be who God created you to be. Do what it is that he's called you to do. And it may not look like anyone else. And you don't have to create a new way of doing it. Just do it the way that God's created you to do it.
Amen. Yeah. And I think that's so key to ministry of any kind, singles ministry, just staying connected to the Father, constantly connecting yourself to the vine, because there's always going to be an opportunity to make it about ourselves. And in doing that, we lose our purpose, and then you find yourself just kind of out in the middle of the water, just like, what in the world is going on? Because we're not connected to our source, and it's easy to lose your way, even when you have somebody to walk this road with you. And so that would be, I guess, my biggest piece of advice is just stay connected to the Father, individually, because one of the things that we talk about in marriage counseling is that we're not two half people coming together. Jesus completes us individually, but we come together to complement one another. And God knows our strengths and our weaknesses. And I'm so thankful for my amazing husband and how God knew before we were born, that what we were going to need, who we were going to need. And so I'm so thankful for that as long as I'm connected to him, I'm going to be able to do what he's asked me to do for my family, for our ministry. And so, that would be just, I think, my biggest piece of advice.
And I think with that, all of those things being said, communication, open lines of communication, and that's with God, with one another, with your family. Because if you don't communicate, then you don't know what others are thinking, how, and so you always have to have those lines of communication open, have no secrets. And I know that that's more challenging to some than others, It hasn't been a challenge for us because that's the way we started when we got married. Everything was open, and we've always had those lines of communication. So
one more thing is just, I think when you're connected to the Father, He's never going to give you a piece of advice that's going to draw you away from your family. And that, what I find so heartbreaking a lot of times when you hear of ministry families breaking up is that they feel like God's called them in different directions. And that's not the character of God that I know, that He would never draw us away from our family. And so I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that when we enter into covenant, it's forever. And so, and God is the one who deals with conflict better than anybody else. And so His desire is for our families to be reconciled and to be in unity with one another. Now we're all individual people and we all get to make our own choices, but I think when we look at the design that God intended for marriage to look like, it's a covenant relationship. And there's going to be hard days, there's going to be challenging days, but at the end of the day, we've made a covenant, and sometimes we just have to hold on to the one who holds on to our covenant, and that's the one.